All right, so people are still coming in, but I feel like I've got a lot of things that I want to talk to you about. So, all right, so we're going to count to 60 to let a few more people come in. Rockville, Maryland, Angela Dale says, Alexandra's writing keeps me sane, or at least helps me laugh at this insanity. Totally. Totally.
That's really nice to hear. I'm glad.
I like the boat piece the other day.
It was mostly a vehicle for puns, or a vessel, I should say, for puns, which, is that a pun, or is that just sort of like a figurative use of a literal term? I think it might be the second. But
so you are a pun champion. Did I see that in your bio?
That is true, and proud.
So how is there, what is a pun contest?
Well, so there's this thing in Austin every year, although this year, of course, in these times, it's been rescheduled and I'm not sure what its status is, but that happens usually in May at the O. Henry historic site, where people gather from all over the country and sometimes all over the world and compete making puns. And there's like a prepared punniest in show segment where you make 90 seconds of puns on a topic of your own choosing. And then there's pun slingers, where you go head to head with somebody else and they just give you a topic and you have to come up with a pun quickly and go. And so punners from all around the world, like there's a big Brooklyn pun scene and they all descend on it. And Austin has a decent pun community. And so it's a lot of fun. And I've been going and competing, and one year I even prevailed. So it's nifty. I would highly recommend you check it out if you're into that sort of thing. And if you're not, avoid it at all costs, because it's exactly what it sounds like. Just puns for hours.
I didn't know there was a pun community, but that's great.
Oh, yeah. All
right, we're gonna get started. Oh my gosh, my Zoom just literally vanished. There we go.
Oh no.
No, here I am. I said, we're gonna get started, and it disappeared. So welcome, Alexandra. Welcome to the Writers Center. We are a literary arts nonprofit that supports writers and people who want to write. I'm going to give you a couple minutes of shtick here, people. We do this through events like this, which are free and open to the public, and hundreds of creative writing workshops each year across genres and abilities. And we do have a scholarship program. And Zach is going to be dropping links into the chat thing. If you want to, we're not fundraising for ourselves right now. We're fundraising just for our scholarship program, because we don't want a rich creative life to be a luxury. So we take Venmo and PayPal. Online workshops range from a year to 1 hour, and they are as low as $20 for members for a pop-up 1 hour workshop. Let's see, we have an inclusive literature workshop. It's a morning conference coming up, and that is going to be talking about diversity or lack of diversity in publishing. Last thing, buy books. Buy Alexandra's book. Here's the book.
Hey!
You should buy this. You should buy this, and then you should go and write reviews about it, because you're going to want to rave. Okay. Alexandra Petri is a columnist for the Washington Post. Her satire has appeared in McSweeney's, New Yorker's Daily Shouts and Murmurs, and other newspapers. Hello, Salt Lake Tribune, on the radio and on TV. She has appeared on a number of podcasts. Wait, don't tell me, which give me a fangirl moment. Jeopardy, where she made what was described as the worst final Jeopardy wager of all time, which was?
I wagered everything. And the answer was also incorrect, but the wager was, they were both tied ahead of me. And so I should have wagered nothing. And instead I was like, I probably will know this. And also I wrote, who is that dude is my answer, which was, I think, correct, but not specific enough. And they did not think that it was correct.
Who is that dude? Okay. And she recently achieved her lifelong dream of being a talking head in a documentary about Benjamin Harrison. And much as I'd like to ask about that, we're gonna jump in with more about your writing. So can you read us Dealer's Choice, an essay from this?
Ooh, yes, absolutely. And so I'm trying to think Dealer's Choice wise. So I think I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna grab my copy.
I did warn her on
the one detail I forgot was to have a copy readily to hand.
So while you're looking, I will say you can put your questions in the chat window. About halfway through, we'll start taking your questions. And if you put the word question in caps, as somebody did, that would be helpful for me who needs help. Okay.
All right, well, I think, so I sort of want to do one that I've always liked, and it's never quite topical. So, it's a little long though. Why don't I do the pigeon? It's slightly topical, and it's from the perspective of a pigeon. So I think those two elements recommend it to our readership. And it's called, I'm in favor of Confederate statues, and I'm definitely not a pigeon. So, 2 reasons I'm definitely not here protesting the removal of this Confederate statue: because I'm a white supremacist who wants to protect a racist legacy, or because I'm a pigeon who has laid an egg on this statue somewhere. Listen, like you, I'm a human being. I have 0 feathers, but many gangly appendages covered in skin, and I am flightless. Yet in spite of this, I love these statues, and not because their little metal hats are great places in which to build a foundation of carefully selected twigs, twine, and assorted debris, then lay a warm, beautiful egg that will someday hatch into a magnificent, glorious bird, the king of the air. I am one of the very fine people whom President Trump was talking about, definitely a person who was there to protest the taking down of the statue for human reasons that had nothing to do with racism or the nest of vulnerable white eggs currently exposed in that Confederate general's hat. I am a human being like you, a featherless biped with hairs all over my epidermis. And I'm not a racist. I don't know what the word racism means. Also, I don't see color. I perceive light on the ultraviolet spectrum, as everyone here does, I hope. That is how we humans perceive light, I'm pretty sure. Getting rid of these statues would be for the birds, an expression I use in its derogatory sense, as we humans often do. Like so many of us here, I do not have a racist bone in my body, though if I did, that racist bone would definitely be dense and not hollow. I just want to protect my nest egg. Not a literal egg in a nest, of course, but one of those metaphorical nest eggs we human beings are always so upset about. Economic anxiety? Yes, I have that. That is what I have. My nest egg, again, is metaphorical, not literally on this statue right now, vulnerable and exposed with its shell open to the elements. Keep that torch away from what is definitely not my only genetic legacy, but a beautifully constructed nest that is unaffiliated with me, a human protester. This is a normal request from me, a human, perched here with you in solidarity on my 2 appendages. I am not here to fan the flames of hatred, an action that I would do with hands and not wings, obviously. I am not a hawk nor a dove. I am not a bird at all. Again, I am not affiliated with any sort of organization with coo or clucks in its name, neither for racist reasons nor for the reason that these are noises a bird would make. I distance myself from both of those things equally. Like so many of you, when I look at this statue, I do not see a figure of hate. I do not see a figure at all, honestly, more of a blur. And that is not because I'm viewing it from above while soaring aloft on the wings that are the greatest boon that can be bestowed by nature, but for another reason that I don't need to spell out. Like all of you, I just want to keep this statue here for reasons that do not have anything to do with wanting to defecate on it, lay eggs on it, or perch on it to preen my beautiful gray feathers, or of course racism. Those are just a few of the multiple reasons that I do not have for wanting this statue to stay exactly where it is, conveniently located near a man on a bench who often eats French fries. A fellow man, I should say, a fellow very fine being who has hideous bone protrusions at the opening to his alimentary canal that he uses to masticate food, just as I do. This isn't a pigeon issue. This statue doesn't provide succor to just racists and pigeons. Who among us has not sheltered here during a high wind and enjoyed a French fry he or she found on the sidewalk and lifted with great effort? I don't think anyone seeing the statue would reasonably think I'm not welcome here, unlike other statues that carry boom boxes and move and demand money and raise their hideous featherless wings to strike at those good citizens who would land on them. These statues are peaceful and quiet. They are just crying out to be perched on, either by humans like myself or sparrows whom I spite as good-for-nothings. It is, to me, as Trump says, not tweets, I, a human, would not understand a tweet, a very, very important statue. I am a human person, very fine, and I'm not here because of racism. I just want to protect that statue at all costs. Yes, I am a hardworking American who struggles all day and then goes home to vomit food into my children's mouths, and I am sick to see what we are doing to this absolutely non-polarizing landmark. Please don't photograph me, not because I'm ashamed to be here, because I am not, or because if there is a flash, I will fly up into the sky in great alarm. I will not do that either, definitely. I just do not like photos. Oh God, flap, 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 get away, get away. Okay, you got me, I'm a pigeon. I'm not sure what these people are doing. So that's the pigeon.
That's awesome. I mean, the terror of Zoom is that people are happy and smiling and want to be like, yeah, but you can't hear it, but I'll do it for everybody.
I just really wanted to wrangle all of the possible things that a pigeon could be thinking about itself. And
so I'm going to jump in. I'm going to push aside the questions about the book for a moment and get more towards the columns, because that you have such a strong voice. How did it evolve? How did you become somebody else? Go ahead.
I think it's funny because it's interesting that you say that I have a strong voice, because I feel like one of the nifty things I get to do is sometimes I'll get to try like a different genre and do things that are sort of all around in different types of ways. But I think it does still come through that it's by me, just because I'm the only person doing the writing. So ultimately it is reduced to that. But I think honestly by reading a lot, I love to read, she said, unsurprisingly. And I enjoy very much like writers who have like very pronounced styles. Like, you know, Dickens, say what you will about the guy, he really knows how to make a sentence sound unmistakably like it was written by Charles Dickens, which sounds like I'm insulting him, but it's actually a compliment. So I think it's one of those things where Ezra Pound said that the only writer you can read and not sort of pick up a little bit of their style is Chaucer. So if like you want like a palate cleanser, read some Chaucer, which I always come around to saying this, because I feel like sometimes you can tell that I've been reading a whole bunch of like Gore Vidal essays, because I'll be doing all of these parentheticals, which he loves to do, like a sort of, hey, check it out, I'm doing a parenthetical address to you, the reader, because we're having a conversation. And I love that as a stylistic tick. And then I'm like, okay, I need to get back to, I got to read more Chaucer so I can remember what I used to sound like. But so I do think there's a sort of a sponge-like effect you get from your reading. And so it'll be interesting to see, you know, how I sound years from now if I get to keep doing this.
So what is your writing process like? How do you choose your I mean, I'm guessing that many of the people, everybody like I, read your column. I can't say all the time because I do eat and sleep and things, but I read it a lot. So how do you choose a topic? What's your process like? And then also, has it changed during the pandemic?
It's changed, like, I would say it's interesting because the thing about, I didn't used to go into the office a ton beforehand. Now that I can't go into the office, I'm just like, the office would be so good. I really am nostalgic for that beautiful place where I got to share air with my coworkers and bond with them and all of those things. But because one of the key things that I used to do when I was stuck or having difficulty coming up with where I would have it, usually I have like a topic or an idea or sort of like a prompt that I know I want to write something about it. Like I knew that the boat parade had happened. I'm like, I want to write something about this, like the chaos of the boat parade. At first I'm like, maybe this should be sort of like a wreck of the Hesperus type situation. But my editor, who loves a good abstruse literary reference as much as the next guy, assuming the next guy really loves it, because he's like very high on loving like an obscure reference. He's like, listen, I've read Anne of Green Gables, I think, I don't know, well, listen, I don't know what you're talking about with the wreck of the Hesperus. And I'm like, it's in Anne of Green Gables. And he's like, please don't hang an entire piece on this obscure Longfellow poem that maybe people who remember Anne of Green Gables in like minute detail will recollect. Like maybe do something a little more mainstream, like the Iliad or something, for a given definition of mainstream. So sometimes, usually what I would do if I'm like, I know what I kind of want to do, but I don't fully know it, is I would like go on a walk and sort of change scenery. And then I would read the comics and drink some coffee and sort of do all of the like things you can do to procrastinate until you start seeing your deadline looming up on you and you have to get some words down and then you have to get some more words down. And then sometimes you've written the whole piece and you think, oh, now I know what it should have been and it's none of this. And then you completely rewrite it from scratch, which can happen. Or you're like, well, here's one version, and then you write another bonus version, and you send the both to your editor and say, fight it out. So, because I tend to be, I've said this before, but I tend to be sort of an R producer. Like in the natural world, you have R producers and like N producers, and like if you're an N producer, you have every 2 years you produce a new elephant very slowly after a gestation period of 22 months with like lots of effort. And if you're an R producer, you're just like, I'm a codfish, here's 8,000 eggs, I hope one of them lives. I don't care, like get rid of 7,999 of them as long as we get the one that makes it out. And I'm very much, here's my codfish eggs, let me spew them at you.
Okay. I love that. Okay, so you actually do use a lot of cultural references in your work. So just in the book alone, which all of you should buy and write reviews, you reference Winterfell and The Matrix and The Lion in Winter, which I had to look up. So I love that you trust the reader to have a broad-based knowledge. But so I was going to ask you about that anyway. And I want to know what your relationship with your editor, because it's like, okay, you're trusting the reader to know of Anne of Green Gables, and where's the balance between like the references you drop in that just people get or they don't?
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting, because ideally, even if you're not like, oh, I understand that this is a specific quote of this specific thing from this like one episode of HBO's gritty prison drama Oz that like Petri is obsessed with, or whatever it is, you can still enjoy the thing that's presented to you. But one of my favorite things as a reader is when authors are just like mentioning something that they read that they loved, because then I feel like it just opens a door and you're like, oh, you're referencing that, I gotta go read that. And then you read that. So like just reading like Oscar Wilde, like he's just got so many references. You're like, I gotta go read Pater now. I gotta go read Matthew Arnold. I gotta learn about sweetness and light, which sounds like it's something you should put in your coffee, but is actually a philosophy of aesthetic appreciation. And so I just think it's nifty if you're enthusiastic about something, just sort of drop it in there. And worst case scenario, people will still be like, I enjoyed 4 of those things and one of them made no sense to me, and stop it. But maybe then you can get more people to like the thing, and it creates an expanding circle.
I like it. I mean, I don't have to just comment on your comments. That's sort of a weird tick I just developed today, which I will stop. You vary the columns. We're here to talk about craft. So you vary the columns formats. So for instance, in this book, which you should buy and write a review, and I'm not on commission. So you wrote a book report on the Mueller report, a faux manifesto of a political moderate. And it's almost like a Dungeons and Dragons like narration of a coven of nasty women gathering. So how do you land on a format? Do you choose a topic and then a format? How deliberate are you in choosing in shaking it up in terms of not doing the same thing?
I think I'm pretty deliberate in terms of, because I feel like if I'm bored by it, then anyone who's not me is definitely going to 100% be bored by it. And I also think it's a way that, because these days, everything that's going on is both routine and deeply shocking and horrifying at the same time. So you have this weird thing where, like, your brain wants to get used to it, but you're also like, no, brain, now is not a time to get used to. The fact that these things are happening on a regular basis does not make them normal or good or like, yes, it's Tuesday. Of course, we've heard about like 6 more scandals in the use of federal funds. And like, that's the positive uplifting side. And the one that doesn't involve like massive devastation of human lives by like carelessness and deceit. So it's a weird balance to strike. And I think sometimes if you jostle around in genre, you're at least able to keep saying a thing that feels important to comment on without being like, oh, this again. So I'm trying to avoid the oh, this again of it all as much as possible. I feel like there was another question in your question that I've now forgotten about craft, but it'll come to me.
How do you land on a format? Does the topic, see, this is why my brain is mush. So I actually wrote all this out. So does the topic somehow suggest it? So when you, for instance, the boat piece is in my mind because that's the last one I read, when you decide what you want to write about, does that inform the format that you choose?
I think definitely. Sometimes you automatically know what it's going to be. And sometimes you think this is very, like, just the idea that's been suggested by this is so bizarre that I want to paddle around in it and see what suggests itself. Like, there is this sort of offhand remark that the president made about, like, you need to have your Second Amendment rights to guard your potatoes. And I'm just like, what world is this statement occupying? I want to learn more about these people who are guarding the potatoes. And so I just wound up writing this, like, we had to cut it down. It was like 2,000 words of like a detailed life of a potato guardian. Cause I'm just like, there's something in here. Like there's a ferret crawling around in this tube and I want to identify the ferret. So, or sometimes you just think, I just got to present this as straight as possible because it's done all the work for me, which was sort of true for the boats. It was mostly just, this happened, let's discuss.
So, yeah, so as you've said, not to me, but like somewhere that I read, more and more things are absurd these days and fewer are funny. So how, as a satire writer, how has that affected you? And then we can fold that into the question of how you think humor affects the political process. I can see Russia from my house.
Yeah, no, that was a good example of that impression really became a thing of all of its own. And so now to this day, people think that, Sarah Palin said, I could see Russia from my house. So whereas what she did say was things like, what do you read? All of the magazines, all of the ones that are there. But it is an interesting exchange. I saw someone in the chat was saying something about how Patton Oswalt was saying, well, it's impossible to do satire because the second you sort of parody something, it turns out that like 3 minutes ago, the president already did a bigger, worse, more bizarre version of it. And so I think actually sometimes your job is just to, instead of pumping the thing to 11 and being like, well, if we heighten this a tiny bit more, we'll all understand that it's bad. The thing is already heightened and it's already bad. And so you have to figure out a way of like getting a vector where you can drag it towards what the normal thing ought to be. It's like almost like a geometrical problem of like, what are you pointing towards? And hopefully you're pointing towards a situation where none of this would be happening. And so I think the direction of it's changed, but I think the effort to do it continues to be worthwhile. Because sometimes if you can just get somebody to be like, okay, there's like one step that I'm willing to make with you, and then it can open up an avenue of agreement. Ideally, you hope. Sometimes it's hard to know what's happening because writing a column can be like dropping a rose petal into the Grand Canyon and waiting for an echo. But sometimes you get an echo and it's nice.
I always ask my kids when they say something amusing, I'm like, did you just think of that? But I like the rose petal into the canyon. Did you just think of that?
No, that's a P.G. Wodehouse quote that I've appropriated. He described publishing a volume of poetry and expecting like an ardent response is like dropping a rose petal into the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo. But it's one of those things. Yeah. So thank you, P.G. Wodehouse, for letting me borrow it. Sorry about the 1940s.
Oh no, I'm gonna appropriate it as my own as well. So All right, I'm going to go to the chat window, and I'm going to start with question from Michael. When did essay writing stop being something you had to do in high school and morphed into something you love doing? Which
I feel like definitely in high school, there's sort of the dread of, oh my gosh, how am I going to get 2,000 words onto a page between now and Friday? And then I think honestly having a shorter deadline, because during college, I took this seminar freshman year about like Mark Twain and the Civil War, which was a lot of fun and up two of my alleys. And so, and every week we had to write like a response paper of like 250 words. And I discovered quickly that the time period in which I thought it would be necessary for me to work to write the paper was getting shorter and shorter until I was like, I can do this over lunch. And then I'm like, oh, I can just write quickly and like it won't be terrible. And that was a fun discovery to make. And then I also started writing a column during college, which was like an essay I'm doing voluntarily for fun. And so once it became, I feel like there's so many things where if you think about it, like a recreational activity is actually a form of work, but you're just enjoying, like knitting, like you're just making fabric for free. You paid someone money so you can build some fabric at home. Or like, you know, like playing a board game. It's just like you're doing like a small task that involves like moving widgets from one point to another, but you're doing it because it excites you. Like, cause when it goes well, it's fun. And even when it goes badly, you're still having a good time. But like most writers, I love having written, and sometimes the process of writing is just like pulling your hair out.
yes, yes. Question from Beth. And by the way, if you put questions way up at the beginning, if you want to throw them in again, that would help the middle-ager over here. So Beth asks, do you worry about your satirical headlines that may be interpreted as real by readers that don't go on to read the article and understand its satire? Because how do you know in these crazy times when real stories are not believable?
Yes, I do worry about that sometimes, because I think sometimes people only see the headline, especially because we have a paywall. And so every so often I'm like, oh crap, in retrospect, we should have put like there was one recently where the president was saying, you know, protect the integrity of the election, vote twice. And I really wish we'd put the president says, protect the integrity of the election, vote twice, instead of it just being the headline. And so I feel like it is something you have to think about. But I do hope that people will read the whole piece. And I also think, you know, you can get to a point from that argument of like, where all satire is impermissible. And so you do have to at least have confidence in people to read things. Otherwise there'd be no point in the endeavor. But I do think a headline is an area where you can hopefully make it legible, and it's like where you feel like it's sort of on them, and like if you can get it to a point where it's on the reader as opposed to you really like trick them by just being like, here's a thing that is not happening in any way, shape, or form. And
so, I just want to ask, as a writer myself, I don't get to write my own headlines. Potato reference, I'm smaller potatoes, but do you get to write your own headlines?
I usually like suggest a headline, and sometimes it's also the headline we wind up with. And because like we have like a whole like elaborate process where they try to get things that are both descriptive and clickable. And so sometimes like they'll come up with something that's even more descriptive and clickable than you put there. Or you'll be like, this wasn't what I wanted, but it'll still be like, it's basically the thing. So yeah, no, the answer is often.
Okay. Aspirational. Okay. So, I mean, for people on the call. So what do you do for inspiration? Where or how do you most often find it?
Well, I think usually I'll sort of read the newspaper and then I'll be upset about something. And then I'm like, well, I got to write something about it. And then I'm lucky enough that I get to be able to go and do that. So that's a good place to start. And other than that, if I know what I'm like the what of it, but I don't know the how of it, then I'll try to read something else and see if maybe that will inspire it. Or I'll like do a crossword puzzle or do that thing where you try to find all the letters for the B, I'm really obsessed with that. And then you look up and then your deadline's coming on you quickly. And then I always like from a very early age as a writer, I was always like, well, I'm just going to write the worst possible sentence because then a sentence will exist and I can always go back and fix it. And so just like, I would start with like, what is the absolute worst sentence? And then I would try to write like a slightly less bad sentence. And then, you know, you do that 10 times and suddenly you've got a pretty okay sentence. And that, but for a whole piece, you can get a draft out, even if it's, you know, one of those not inspirational feeling days. Because there's this famous quote from a guy who was like, you know, if only I'd had like the right place to sit and like the proper, you know, glass of coffee and like lighting conditions, I could have been Mozart. And it's like, you can't wait for exactly all of the conditions, otherwise you never get anything out there. Done is better than perfect, as they say, which, especially when you have like a daily deadline, it has to be. You can't wait for it to be perfect, otherwise you're going to be. But at the same time, it's better than having a thrice daily deadline, which I had for a while, and then they were like, this is not even done. We gotta stop.
A glass of coffee. So my great-grandfather from Russia would talk about a glass of tea. So interesting. All right. Perhaps there are ways your satire has adapted to the Trump era specifically. Do different eras need different kinds of skewering? That's from Juliet.
Ooh, I think yes. I think it also, what needs skewering in any era sort of depends on like what your values are and what you think is good. Because like Aristophanes, I don't know if we don't really have that many other comic poets from that era. All we have are snippets. Or no, he's not really a comic poet, he's a comic playwright, but also there's like a lot of verse in there. Anyway, you know, Aristophanes, the guy who wrote those funny plays for a given value of funny. And all of his stuff was like, kids these days, they're, you know, they're not as fit as they used to be, and everyone's too lustful and it's bad, and like just the philosophy is too much and I wouldn't send my kid there. And just all of this, like his perspective of what was going wrong in Athenian society, besides like Cleisthenes is too open with his personal life, and I don't like that guy who we put in charge whose name is now eluding me. He was like a tanner. He had a Cleon. Yeah, he hated Cleon. He's like, Cleon is bad news. But so I'm sure, I wonder if like we got to see the full range of Athenian theater, and there were also people being like, Cleon's not going far enough, and like we need more philosophy. Philosophy's good for the kids. And if there was a play with like that attitude, but all we've got is like this conservative guy being like, enough with the kids and the philosophy. So I do think from that sense, like that era was like, oh, the satire we're gonna have is saying things have gone too far. And these days I feel like everyone's like, people are being hurt, please stop hurting people. Like a lot of comedy is trying to be like, this also looks dumb while you're doing it. But I'm sure there's people whose attitude is like, things haven't gone far enough and Trump needs to be more empowered. And like, they're also making sketch videos somewhere, and I'm sure you can find them. So it depends on what your attitude is, what you think it needs prodding at, and how you prod at it.
Question from Abby. Do you consider yourself a news junkie? And if so, how do you manage your news intake these days?
I consider myself someone who has like a serious phone problem. So it's more that I follow a lot of journalists. I follow, like, my Twitter feed is just, oh, here are things that are all in the area of things you should care about, and you need to read all of them, but there's never an end to the internet. And so you can just keep scrolling forever. It's not like my email inbox, which does theoretically have an end, has like 81,000 new emails in it. And yesterday I made like a big effort. I think I got rid of like 1,000 of them, and it's still got like 80,000. It's really like, you know, Sisyphus didn't know how good he had it. But I feel like I'm constantly consuming news or news adjacent things. And sometimes it can help when you're trying to moderate it to just like sit down with a print newspaper, which has a beginning, middle, and end. And it's like, that's all the news there is today. I feel like my parents, just folks of their generation, have a much saner news consumption habit where they're like, we're going to read the paper in the morning, and then in the evening, we're going to see what the evening news is. And that's it. They're not just like, you know, I'm going to visit the restroom. Oh my gosh, someone I don't know about is being like imploding on the internet somewhere, and suddenly I've got all these opinions about things that like minutes ago I had no information on. But it can also be fun to suddenly sprout opinions on things you know nothing about, even if you keep them in like a greenhouse in your soul and don't release them to the internet at large.
A question from Mary Kay Zravlov. Hi, Mary Kay.
Hey, Mary Kay!
Oh, let's all have coffee. Okay, sorry. Talk to us about your playwriting, please.
Ooh, yes, I would love to. I actually, a play of mine is in the process of like emerging. We Zoom recorded all of it, so it was going to be on stage like in March, and then for obvious reasons, stages in March became not a place that anyone wanted to be. The set is still up at the Atlas Performing Arts Center. Yeah, and it's like, it was about the Buckley-Vidal debates in 1968, and was sort of set in like a hellscape where they're reliving them over and over again. And anyway, I enjoyed it, and I think that people will enjoy it as well. I'm really good at self-promotion, if you can't tell. But
hey, let's have another moment.
Yes, but so it's been a lot of fun writing plays because writing a column is a very solitary activity where you're doing all of the voices. And when you get to have other people in the room who can also do the voices, and you have a director who sees things that you didn't even see, and then you have actors with like their ability to say things, and you could tell like just the wealth of meaning that you put into it by like inhabiting words with your body, and just, it's so cool. I just think it's the coolest thing in the world. So I always have loved to do it, and I've been honored to get the chance a couple of times. And I've been very slowly working on a musical, but obviously anything that like goes on a stage where people gather and like have breath shared is off for a while. But I hope that when stages come back, people will get to see the musical. And that before stages come back, I think you can virtually consume the Zoom recording of Inherit the Windbag, which was the Buckley-Vidal play. It was a joke title, and then it stuck because we couldn't come up with anything better. But yeah, no, so I very much enjoy getting, and anything where you can like make something with people who are niftier than you are. I always think that's fun.
And just putting this out there, the Writer's Center has a theater.
That is true.
Just
yeah, someday when we can go and be. Yeah.
No one's allowed in, right? No, it's okay. So a question from Claudia: did stand-up comedy influence your writing? If so, how?
Oh yes, no. So I think Claudia also said in a different comment that like we encountered each other first at stand-up at an open mic in Georgetown like years ago. So hello. It has been a while. Honestly, I enjoyed doing stand-up comedy very much when I did it, but I'm also now like, I feel like it's sort of like you have your marathon horses and your sprint horses, and I feel like I'm whatever type of horse, if I had to perform the same set every day, my mind would implode. Like I have a friend who's been doing stand-up, like we were in the Stand-Up Comic Society together, which the acronym is SUCKS, and we thought it was really nifty. And so it was like, you know, Harvard Stand-Up Comic Society was like, Harvard sucks. And then like one of the deans or people who has to approve it was like, oh, you can't say this. And we're like, oh, they figured out the acronym. And he was like, you have to say Harvard College Stand-Up Comedy Society. So it wasn't the sucks that he objected to. It was the fact that it didn't include college. So anyway, I apologize for that digression. But see, and he still does like some of the same bits that like we were doing back in the day. Like it's a much more slowly self-replacing ship of Theseus. I feel like your stand-up comedy bits are, because like you get some that you really like and then you work on them and then you do them until they're perfect and then you like toss them and you do new ones. And I like getting to do something new every day, but I do love the experience of getting to say a joke to people and see if it works, and then see if maybe if you sort of flail around, that'll help sell it better. So I do miss like the camaraderie of doing that with people, but and I like getting to do a sit-down type-based comedy these days, but I still have mad respect as they say, for the stand-up comedy world and the people in it.
From Ron, you have published in top journals and periodicals. Congratulations. Any advice for new writers wanting to submit their first satire pieces? Any publications where we can get started?
I feel like McSweeney's is a good place to get started. I have a friend who's extremely funny and submits there a lot, and they have the nicest rejection letters of any publication. I submitted there before, and like the rejections were always like, "Oh, I really see what you did here. Like, you did a good job." So I'd highly recommend starting there. And then often like a lot of people read that, and like the friend who got a thing in there, they're like, "Oh, like she got this random email from somebody else who was like, I'm a filmmaker." So like you can get connected via doing that. So that'd be a good place I would suggest as a fun jumping off point. Or if you go to duotrope.com and you sort things by like how easy it is to get accepted, that's something I used to do and continue to do. But
yeah, no, I will. McSweeney's is Chris at McSweeney's, man.
Right, so nice.
He's nice, but yeah, but I think Duotrope, can someone spell that? duotrope.com and Submittable have lots of resources in terms of who's looking for what.
Yeah, because like if you have like a funny thing that's also kind of sci-fi, you could send it to like dailysciencefiction.com. Like it's amazing, like different genres. Like there's like tons of. I'm mentioning McSweeney's and dailysciencefiction.com because those are two that I like also got into back in the day.
A question from Keith. Speaking of Austin, which was a while ago, I got coverage for a screenplay. I'm sorry, from them that said Patton Oswalt put it best when he said it's very hard for a comedian to do political comedy in this age. He uses a metaphor of Trump pooping on the street. He turns to his friends for 10 seconds to make a joke about the pooping, and his friends already said the joke is stale already since Trump already made a sombrero out of the poop.
Yeah, no, I saw this earlier, and I think it's a very good analogy for the difficulty of if you're just trying to enhance the thing to 11, like they pretty much within that week will just already make the sombrero out of the poop. So just describing, being like, but what if it were the same thing but slightly worse as a strategy for satirizing tends not to work. So you have to figure out like some other way of coming at it where it's like, but if I like put it into this world, maybe people will see like this analogy works, and sometimes that doesn't work. Or if you like try to locate your perspective differently. So I think the challenge is like, you can't just be like sombrero, but a bigger sombrero. You have to figure out another angle of coming in at it. And so I think genre can be your friend there sometimes. Because yeah, the thing itself is so much worse than anything you would make up about it. It's like, you know, I always use this analogy, but like Jonathan Swift, he didn't get like emails after he wrote his piece about, you know, we should definitely solve the problem by eating the Irish babies. He didn't get like, his inbox didn't immediately fill up with people being like, thank you, finally someone has the courage to say what we've all been thinking. And I feel like that would happen now. So I think you can't just heighten it, you have to do something else to it.
Got it. So I feel like if Zach were emceeing this, he'd have a good follow-up, but I'm going to go back to the chat. No, because you're so I get what you're saying. So your job is not to make it worse or make it bigger. It's to make it different. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think because just like blowing it up and heightening it. So or like there was one time when Trump was like, you know, this judge is of like Mexican heritage and therefore he can't rule on this. And then I was like, next he'll be saying like female judges can't rule on this. And then like they said like also female judges can't rule on this. I'm like, oh, so like you can't just say the same thing but more so. You have to be like, I wish I'd taken a different tack on that instead of just being like this plus and everyone can agree that it's bad, because already the thing is happening and people aren't necessarily on board with its awfulness. So you have to figure out some other way of like situating it or like a different perspective, or like something. There's just, you have to come around instead of blowing up, I think.
Got it. Mara says, any tips for breaking into humor writing? Get a following on Twitter, start a blog?
I think it sort of depends on like what your style of joke writing is. Cause like, if you're like a short form, I like to make a quick quip type joke, then like Twitter is a good place. And if you're like I like to write a long form thing and that's where my voice really is, then I think a blog is a good start. And then also like submitting, if you have a topical thing, to, you know, the aforementioned places are, I feel like you have to have a good sense of like, what is your voice and like, what is the thing that you're good at? And if you don't know, keep trying stuff. And if you're like unsure, and you know, it's always just one of those things where like you could just like post something on Facebook and your friends will be like, this is really good, you should do something with it. Like start with like cherished friends who you could trust to read your stuff and give you good feedback. If you're like, oh, I don't know, like, is there a pony in this? Because sometimes there's a pony in it and you just need somebody else to tell you. Instead of just sort of diving into the internet, that could be a better way of like immediately getting going.
Oh, I love this question from Gretchen. Is any topic off limits?
I think yes. I mean, and it's sort of, I mean, one of the things that sort of the unspoken rules are like, usually people are like, well, the president's kids. Like that's sort of an example of generally like you don't do anything with that. But I think it's also, there's some things that just aren't funny and like you shouldn't try to make them funny. And it's really like right now, there's sort of, I mean, the pandemic that's going on, like literally almost 200,000 people have died. And that's just not funny. There's nothing funny about that. That's like devastating and horrible. And like, I feel like as a nation, we're just like deeply traumatized by the fact that it's ongoing. It hasn't stopped. We haven't like been able to grieve because it's not over yet. And so there are all these things about like living in these conditions that are sort of strange, like the Zoom things, all of the like ways that you have to relate to your friends. And like all of that is funny, but like the underlying fact that just like so much grief and so much pain, there's nothing funny about that. So I would consider that to be off limits. And I mean, like, it's one of those, like they say like no exposition except in anger. And it's sort of like, you can mention it if you're like, this is going on also. And the president is acting as though we're like living in a world where it's fine and has somehow been resolved. And like, that's a horrible reality. And there's something like you can, I think you have to acknowledge and point that out. And that attempt to sort of obfuscate this horror like is something that can be made fun of, but like the horror itself, I don't think there are any jokes there. Versus.
Question from Brad. Given how budding your satire is and how dark the topics are you engage with, you are somehow cheerful before our eyes. Does the process of writing your satire make you less upset about the world?
I think this is my sort of authentic underlying self tends to be a sort of cheerful and expansive person. And on days when it's not, I am not, but this is basically like, if I'm functioning correctly, this is what I'm like. And so, but I do think, I mean, there's this E.M. Forster quote that I go to a lot where he's making fun of this woman who says, you know, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? But often in writing, it's like, I'm more articulate and more able to be as angry as I really am when I'm on paper than I am sort of sitting here like doing my jazz hands of normal conversation. So I think sometimes you can like be your more authentic self when you're just the black letters crawling across white or cream colored page than when you're having to also be a social being. I feel like it's the most robotic possible description of like, you have a personality. Why, yes, but if I didn't, I'd be a more effective writer.
Someone get this one another beer. So from Priya, I don't know if this has been said, but as you said, it is a mad and interesting time. What what I really appreciative of is the way your work has provided solace to many. Well, it does, as satire, heighten events that feel unreal. It also makes us feel as if you hear exactly how many of us are feeling. So, from a writing standpoint, how do you balance the rage and vitriol you must be feeling with making poignant commentary on a situation that is at times untenable? Also, thank you for your writing.
Oh, thank you, yeah, for that. I think, honestly, it's in what you said. The thing where the thing that keeps me going on days where I'm like, I'm exhausted by this, and I can't believe that this is the thing that's happening today. That is the only thing that I have to be describing, because it's the real thing that's going on. Is like when I get an email from somebody be like, "You are helping me get through this," and I'm like, well, I'm lucky enough that I get to write, and I both have to and get to write about it. And so the have to of it is made better by hearing from people who are like, this has helped me. Because then I'm like, what am I even doing? Why am I writing? And it's like, well, because, I got an email from somebody who said that this was useful to them. And it's nice to know that, because I'm not building a plumbing system where I can be like, oh, tangibly, look at this, look at all the waste that was gotten rid of. I did such an awesome thing. So it's nice to periodically feel that I'm at least the equivalent of having a donut where it made your day feel marginally better. And so that feedback helps a lot.
We are running close to out of time, so toss your questions in fast. Thomas says, I recall a recent piece that was really more heartbreaking than hilarious. Can you talk to that border crossing where humor is no longer appropriate, even if irony? And then we're missing some words, Thomas, but as my 13-year-old told me the other day, humor, tragedy plus time. I'm like, okay, enough YouTube, but.
No, I think, I do think there is sort of humor in every situation, but some things are funny because they're true. And sometimes the humor is just there's a moment of recognition that you're having with somebody else of oh, you saw this. I'm also there's a person who's seeing this with me, and that can be a wonderful feeling. But sometimes, there's a subject where there's nothing funny to be said about it. And I think people trust you more, and you feel better about yourself if you don't feel well, I gotta make jokes because I'm the joke maker. You don't want to wind up going to the Pagliacci's therapist clown joke situation. So I think you just gotta be honest, and sometimes the honesty is I thought this was ridiculous, and here's something about it that was particularly ridiculous, and I'd like to make a joke about it now. And sometimes the honesty is just this is bad, this is horrible. And on those days, people were it said that there was a lighter take. Where was my lighter take? A voice that apparently they have. And but I think in the long run, you're better off not forcing it, because there's nothing worse than sort of I can be very hokey, and I'm not somebody was your real career should have been writing the sides of popsicle sticks, and I'm that would be an honor, and I take that as a compliment. But so I'm not ashamed of being hokey, but I feel if you're always trying to force it, then you sort of a little something in you dies. So I don't want that thing to die any sooner than it can, any earlier than the latest possible moment. So I'm going to keep trying to postpone that.
So I'd actually like to know, how do you deal with trolls? Because I'm guessing you get some pushback?
Oh, I get some fun emails, but it's, I get many more nice emails. I think maybe because of the paywall. And if you're subscribed, the people who the soup here is terrible and there's so little of it. But so, every so often I'll get the real mean email of I'm coming for you with a soup can. Yes, somebody was you should be struck with a soup can. And you get some nice Anglo-Saxon words thrown in there. But I don't know, it really doesn't, what bothers me way more is when even though I tend to, sometimes when I get like a troll email, everything in me is like, I gotta respond to this. Like I'll get a lovely email and I'll be like, oh, I should really send a nice response. And like 3 years pass. So sorry to this one person who sent me the most beautiful email in the world. And I put a little flag on it and I'm like, I'm gonna send such a great note. And every few weekends, I'm like, now's the day I'm gonna send this perfect note back. And I haven't, but like troll will send me a note being like, you are bad, and like there's like a typo, and I'm immediately like, listen, sir, I'm a being like yourself, and I wish to connect with you on a human level, and which is a waste of effort. But for somehow that's the perverse incentive system that's set up in my brain. So I'm guilty of doing that, but mostly it doesn't. I've also been lucky in that I feel like many women on the internet writing, and like especially like women of color, have like a much worse experience with trolls than I've had. So I mean, it's also like I just haven't had the bad version of the life online yet. So I'm grateful for that.
Last question. There's 5:57. Last question from Sylvia. How would you describe your value system? Comedy as a powerful way of criticizing social problems. How do you avoid moralizing in your writing? I threw the in your writing part in because this is a craft talk.
Ooh, yeah, I think this is like the biggest question of all, but I guess, put simply, I think everybody is capable of tremendous good and tremendous evil. Like everyone's basically human, and that's like the great and the sad thing about everyone, is that like there's always a person in there. And so I try to always think about the fact that there's a person in there when I'm writing, and that's like that's sort of my bottom line, and from which everything stems. And like that's the one thing that I feel like I've evolved to that, because like, you know, when you're like a young person writing and you're like, everything's jokes, I can make comedy about everything, and like you don't think about it, like it's so funny when like somebody like falls down a flight of stairs and dies, because like you add enough time to that, and that's like a hilarious joke. And I feel like as I've gotten hopefully more mature, but certainly older, it's just like trying to remember that there's a person in there. That's what I hope is the center of all of this. And so I think like people get trapped in systems in ways that make them behave like inhumanely to each other. And if you can point that out, sometimes you can get a good result, I hope. And I don't know, moralizing, hopefully by making so many jokes that no one notices, and or at least puns in many cases.
And that's a wrap. So I want to be respectful of people's time. It is 6 o'clock. Alexandra, if you'd like to hang out for a few minutes, we can unmute people.
Let's do it. I've still got about an inch of beer, so until the beer is gone, I'm all yours.